Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Munro Live podcast. I'm Kevin Harty, and I'm here with Jon Rettinger. And Jon, I don't know a lot about you, but you have a pretty interesting background. You've been involved with YouTube for a very long time. You owned a tech review company, and then now you've kind of made YouTube your primary focus. So it's been kind of like a pretty interesting journey.
It's been a good long run, going back 15 or 16 years, even before YouTube partner program. But my loves, aside from my family, has always been cars, tech, and sports. So I've been able to get cars and tech sort of in the YouTube space, but sports has been my white whale.
Interesting. With the, like, if I may, with the kind of like the YouTube aspect, I'm ironically, even though this will be broadcasted on YouTube, I'm pretty ignorant about it. But like, what would you say like the biggest difference, now versus when you started with YouTube?
Probably 12 years ago, especially in the car space. YouTube had this thing. They knew they had a lot of eyes on it. They tried to create their own original content. That was sort of the direction they wanted to be a network. So I actually created, it was called Techno Buffalo Drives at the time. It was done by YouTube. It was funded by YouTube. It was developed by YouTube and edited by YouTube. We went out and kind of reviewed a bunch of cars. And then YouTube realized that user-generated was the way to go. And I think that's sort of been the way they've had going forward. They've tried divergent paths with strategy. Algorithmic changes have changed completely how people view the content and how creators upload and sort of the things that go in with algorithmic preference or not. But really YouTube leaning fully into what it is and what it does best as sort of UGC has been the biggest change.
Gotcha. Interesting. And that's essentially how like people are reimbursed and things of that nature, and how content is driven to individual content creators.
Yeah, you sort of on a very baseline. So somebody who's brand new to YouTube, and they're like, "What is this thing? And how do you make money from doing it?" It's like I'm try to explain it to my parents at Thanksgiving. So creating content, thinking of it like a product, right? Anybody's creating content. It's a thing. It might not be a tangible widget, but it's still a product. And sort of YouTube saying, how is this content going to be viewed? Who's going to view it? What are the metrics going to make you be successful? Is it watch time, click-through rate? We're going to serve that to a small subset of people. It'll go out to larger. If it's successful, then more people will watch it. If it's not, then we're going to kind of kill it. Has been a big change to YouTube as well, focusing less on subscriber numbers, more on home feed, and more algorithmic preference versus anything else.
Gotcha. So, as you kind of started, you said you've always been interested in, technology, cars, and sports. Yeah. I like playing sports. I'm kind of like the sport ball type of guy, I've been to one baseball game ever in my entire life. Happened to be a Lion, or not Lions, a Tigers game. But with Jordan, we got kind of goat roped into it. But it was interesting. But so I think you initially started with tech and spent a lot of time with it. Now, and you've always had this kind of background of interest in cars. What would you say is like now, like we'll say with EVs specifically?
Sure.
How do you see like the tech industry and like what is the commonality? Because they're very, very different, industries, and we can kind of talk about that. But
yeah, of course.
What do you see them? What's the commonality to you, from your point of view?
Especially sort of what Tesla started. EVs are computers and software that you can drive. Right. So the overlap with tech is clearly there. You have cars now that play tier 1 games that have some semblance of autonomy in them. You can review and approach cars like tech. Now that approach isn't for everybody. For the car enthusiast crowd, that's an approach that probably grinds them the wrong way. But for folks that are passively watching YouTube or interested in tech, viewing cars in a traditional tech lens has been a kind of unique experience for a lot of people. And somebody like me who I love cars, but I probably know 1/10 of 1% about cars versus what you guys know. I'm just somebody who likes it. Trying to find that middle ground between not necessarily calling myself an expert, but calling myself a enthusiast, and then sort of approaching the content through that lens.
Yeah, it's interesting, prior to even getting in the auto industry, I liked cars, and that was like on my resume when I came into Munro, how many cars I built and things of that nature, failed projects, successful projects. But that's why I kind of like most interested from your background. It sticks out to me because I view them as being so different in many ways, because of like like the capital that gets tied up in cars, and then the thousands of people that are involved with changes, which is in some ways, I think Tesla really has, we've never done any like official work with them. I've never had a chance to see like a line walk at any one of their facilities, see how like kind of they work internally, how they process changes or anything like that. But it's from outside in, right? It's extremely evident that whatever process that they are using, they're able to cut through like red tape, if you will, or kind of like the bureaucratic inertia extremely quickly.
Absolutely. In a previous life, I did marketing and advertising for Honda and Acura. And the work that I did was on the collateral side. So you'd have, year over year changes where it was just a wheel got changed. We had to identify that small change, or, a trim color got changed. Now seeing that model versus what the new wave of automakers are doing is just, it couldn't be more divergent.
Sure. Yeah, it's always interesting, and people ask us all the time, like, what is Tesla doing? And I mean, we have trends. We, again, outside looking in, but it's always very interesting to me when you see like the speed, or I don't even want to say the speed, but the things that they care about, right? And there's obviously a reason for it. They won't want to change something specifically because then you have to essentially change a whole line of like advertising and marketing things. Well, until very, very recently, Tesla didn't have any like conventional advertising. It was us, you, and other people talking about it. It was kind of how word of mouth got out there. It'd be interesting if this ends up changing for Tesla, right? Because essentially, some of our customers are very concerned about a running change because now they have to go change a build and price webpage, right? And then if you're talking about a running change, which means, early on in the production cycle, this part will look this way. And then halfway through it, especially if you're doing like, if you're doing thrifting and cost reduction or something like that, now you get for the last half of a model year, potentially, if you're trying to really maximize savings, and that's the only way that it kind of makes sense. Now half that calendar year gets a less costly execution of that. And that's something that I don't think you really see as a concern for Tesla. And in some ways it's championed, right? Like efficiency over all else, and the Spartan minimalism, and kind of how it's come to fruition. It's just very interesting.
The narrative on Tesla advertising is always so interesting. They obviously used to have a PR department until Elon dismantled it. But they used to advertise through that PR department and did it very subtly. I got to go with Tesla on a trip to Kemi, Finland, to drive Model S. Model 3 was just out at the time on frozen seawater. And sort of the subtext there was talk about it, share about it, share it. And I think that could be construed as advertising. More subtly than kind of anything else, but certainly that, since the PR dismantling, I think that approach has changed. Now you're right, they are doing some more traditional advertising they've ever done before.
Yeah, I mean, I would honestly say like the last 6 months have been very, very interesting, with kind of the whole car space and specifically like the EV space. My Microsoft account essentially just tells me all about how EVs are terrible, how EVs are best in the lower right-hand corner, and just the constant conflict in the world. Clearly it knows what I click on, which, and that all affects each other, right? Supply chain considerations, things of that nature. But it's kind of interesting to me. And I don't know if you like historically from like the tech perspective, right? They iterative launches, right? iPhone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, things of this nature. I guess what do you think about maybe the softening of the EV push in some regards, right? From manufacturing, and then like legitimate, like industrial investment and battery capacity, things like that nature that's kind of coming online. And can you draw any parallels to like how the tech industry is also kind of weathering through similar things?
There's nothing that you can relate. And you touched on earlier just by the cost, right? Maybe you buy a new smartphone every year for $1,000. It's still a lot of money. But you're not buying a new Model 3, Model Y, Model S, and Model X for $40,000+ per year. But also the resource intensive. I mean, they're all using rare earth minerals, and lithium has to be mined and all that stuff. But the degrees of it it's like so varying. I had a question for you. Actually,
Sure.
I have a few questions for you.
If I can answer it, I will. So
Different than tech, but it's a Tesla focused question, and I've
okay.
been getting this question a lot from family, from friends, and online. Do you think consumers should separate Elon from Tesla in their minds, or should they not? Are they intertwined as kind of one entity?
I mean, I don't think they're, and this is just Kevin's personal opinion. Uh, I don't necessarily see them as one and the same. But I feel like he is probably, whether you listen to him on, like Lex Friedman or Joe and I know these things, and you get a chance to like hear him talk for quite a while about things. I think he provides in some ways an immense amount of air cover, right? If you want to be risky, and push change through, like when we'll talk about like the Cybertruck and its like aesthetics maybe a little bit later, but like that made it to production, right? That made it to production. So, and it's because of him. And I'm not even saying about like the level of work, that's everyone else, right? But someone had to sign off on that, right? Like I have friends that are designers at, Ford and other places. And, when the Cybertruck released, like I was talking with them and they're all like, because it completely is not their target market. Like I think they were more concerned about if it came out and it looked like a rebadged F-150, they probably would have like, had a huge concern, but they saw it and it's so different. They're like, okay, we know what a lot of our customers, we have a lot of data about what our customers like and things of that nature. But I guess that's what I see as him being an enabler. But I think, obviously he makes, a lot of different statements and things of that nature. I think he's a key enabler at Tesla. But I think if you are underpinning whether you should buy a Tesla, from him because of him, I think you're discrediting and I don't know how many people off the top of my head work for Tesla, but thousands of people who put a lot of effort into it. And if you value what, like Tesla has done, and I think the reason, they've been able to kind of slash prices and things of that nature has been integration and efficiency gains because and then essentially shorting to ground various other, we'll say profit centers and markups that some other OEMs are still struggling with. You need top cover in order to do that. And I think there's that aspect, and maybe he can bring a protege on, and since the company's already willing to kind of work in that way, it might be, I don't say easy to replace him, but a second in command or whoever it is that, hey, this is my philosophy, I'm checking out, I'm going to Mars, the reins are all yours, congratulations. I do think it's a little disingenuous to like completely tie him to it because there's so many people that work on them that make them what they are, for better or for worse.
So the question of people who said, I love Elon, I will only buy a Tesla, and the people who say, I hate Elon, I will not buy a Tesla because of him. Both of those camps should separate the man from the product?
I think so a little bit, right? Like it's hard for me to know for sure. But with a lot of our customers, there's just a lot of hoops to get through at times, and there's a lot of processes and there's a lot of, meetings and things of that nature. Eric and I were just talking about this. And there's times where we'll be talking, they'll be talking about something and I'm just like, I can't believe we've spent this much time talking about a cost savings idea that's worth so little,
Yeah.
There's a lot of people here. I don't know what the average salary in this meeting is, but I'm looking at the attendee list and I'm like, all right. The dollar per hour is ticking, here. So, yeah, I guess in short, I think you're right. Right. It's a little disingenuous on both those camps. I'd argue though, if you can separate the, we'll say like I don't say non-value added, the non-Tesla specific like comments, conversations, or whatever that is from the man, I think it's not necessarily a bad idea to credit him for making Tesla what it is, right? And giving that air cover, and you could argue that it's not a great work environment or anything like that, but providing the foundation and that top cover to enable an environment to move as fast as it does.
Absolutely agree. I think I love talking about Elon specifically because there's never been a character as polarizing. I think, especially recently, and it's just so interesting to see somebody that's done so much be so polarizing. I actually have a story to share. I don't think I've actually ever shared this story on any video or podcast. Now, this is a story that was told to me from somebody, so take it with a gigantic grain of salt. I know this is not where you thought this podcast was going to go, but here's the soundbite. So I have a colleague, a friend of a friend, who I spoke to, and this person was employee at Tesla under 100. So they were real early in the Tesla days. They now work under Elon at SpaceX. And this was right before the Twitter acquisition, was when we sort of had these conversations. And he said, listen, I haven't talked to Elon in a while. He doesn't work directly with him anymore. He's like, so I don't know. He says, but in my years of working with him, there are two things he cares about: getting to Mars and people driving electric cars. Anything else that he does or says is just to push one of those two things. And this is where I got a laugh out of it. And this is just a funny story. He's like, listen, again, I don't know, but if you look at who was buying Teslas on the political spectrum, you had most people on the left were buying Teslas. It says, I imagine Elon looked at that and was like, how do I get the folks on the right to buy Teslas too? And it's like, and that's when you saw kind of a more political Elon. It was just a real funny antidote. I don't know if it has any modicum of truth to it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, there's definitely correlations, right? You could, I imagine if you asked one of the AIs to kind of like put together a collage of images of, those who vote one way to the other, you'll see like, a Cummins with a deleted exhaust rolling coal, and then, a Nissan Leaf or something like that. So on the opposite end of that spectrum. But yeah, it is interesting. Unfortunately, I mean, politics drives everything, but I feel like there's not enough nuance in the conversation about it, and people aren't really, personally, like one thing I love about Munro is like, there's people from all sorts of backgrounds here. There's nothing that's like kind of like off bounds for conversations. Like the coffee room conversations are interesting here, for sure. And you never feel like there's a kind of like a chilling effect on speech, really, with respect to that. And you get interesting perspectives, and you're able to kind of work through, preconceived notions and things of that nature. So I think it's kind of interesting, but it's unfortunate because you don't see that more in general, like throughout, I think, normal discourse. But what I'm making is I think when you actually like talk to somebody, it's easy in some ways to find common ground. It's like when it's remote and detached, that's when things get kind of heated, and you have kind of like the camps and the trenches are dug and stuff like that. So.
But anyway, I know I zigged and zagged very far.
That's okay.
From your original line of questioning.
That's all right. But you said you had a couple other questions. Did you?
No, so I find him very interesting. So I know Sandy was talking to Elon about Cybertruck, and I think there was some interesting stuff that came out of that. And I love to I think the Cybertruck is such an interesting vehicle to talk about.
Very
interesting. I had some questions. So I was there when the Cybertruck was announced. At the big event,
the window,
when the window shattered and everything. When that first came on stage, I think most people there thought this is just like a Tesla joke, and then they're going to show the real truck. It was like, oh, look what we did. And then when it sort of became that this was really the thing, it was a fascinating exercise. I think.
Sure.
And I don't know if it's form over function, because you could argue that maybe that has the most functional form of any truck. But do you think, in seeing what reservation numbers are now versus what they were, like, I don't know how to feel about the Cybertruck. I go back and forth on it.
Sure.
The more I look at it, the more I've seen it in person. I don't know how to feel about it. I think a lot of people are in the same boat.
Yeah. I mean, I remember watching the reveal. I had my phone on the dash. I'm driving back to Pennsylvania. It comes out. Everyone kind of saw the light bar. So you kind of knew, like, okay, it comes out. I'm like, oh man, this is neat. And it makes like that right turn on the stage. And I'm like, cool. And then I see like, I have a problem with the Cybertruck, essentially B-pillar rearward. So it makes its rounds. I'm like, this looks neat. I don't love the fender flares. It comes, and then I see like the teardrop shape, and I'm like, oh. And for me, like the first thing I thought of is like, aesthetically, it kind of bothers me. It looks like, like a low polygon 90s video game. But like the first thing I thought is like, I was, as someone who has owned numerous trucks throughout his life and uses trucks. I was like, how am I supposed to like walk back? I do this all the time and like reach over that sail panel. And then initially there was a lot of conversations that you could remove the sail panel and you'd be able to get in there because, and then I'm just like, all right. And another thing that kind of made me not upset about it, but I saw it with like the kind of the rumors about it, as when Ford, GM, or Ram, or any of them get another mile per gallon into, or out of it, depending on how you want to take a look at it, of like their vehicles, right? And they go from 21 to 22, 22 to 23. That's huge because of their volume and cafe emissions and stuff like that. And there's obviously the whole side of like carbon emissions associated with production and things of that nature. But if your goal is to get people to drive EVs, and I think we're just realistically at the cusp of a lot of that technology to begin with, I was kind of upset to see a truck that I don't want to say couldn't be used for conventional work, but like, people talk about, like, well, you could do all this stuff. It's got stainless steel, like snow plowing. I'm like, well, and people will make stuff for it, but there's this whole like industry now that has to be adjusted, like work industry adjusted if they're going to use a Cybertruck for it. And it's great for some people, but I just thought in my mind, I was like, oh, okay. If you wanted to use it to plow snow or you wanted to use it to do other stuff, it might be a little bit more difficult to throw a cap, a ladder rack, things of that nature. It's going to catch up. It's kind of a silly thing to kind of, point out in my own opinion, but that's what I immediately saw when I saw those sail panels. But then I'm like, well, range, right? And there's no getting around the cost and the weight of batteries, even if you're vertically integrated, it's still expensive, and weight begets weight. And that's like the biggest thing we kind of struggle even with a lot of our kind of customers is they kind of go down this aspect and, they end up having to add battery modules to move this thing down the road because they are concerned about range targets and things of that nature or underperformance. And everything just gets heavier, so.
Well, I want to chime in here because I got a chance to drive it last week.
Oh, please. Yeah.
There we go.
It is starting to grow on me. I initially thought this thing is ugly. It looks like a bedpan on wheels. Not interested. And then, seeing them up close, going to drive it, it's starting to grow on me. I don't like the stainless steel. They had one in matte black.
Everyone says that looks good.
Yeah, that one, looks like something Batman would drive. And I'm like, I can get behind that.
I'm kind of the same way. I'm conflicted constantly about it. Like from front view, like front ISO, like high and low, I think it looks pretty cool. I don't like the fender flares, but whatever. Same thing, rear view, like the isometric view. I kind of like it. Like side plain view, look at the side of it. I don't, but it is interesting. And honestly, I can't wait to get it. Cause like of all the cars that we've looked at, there's a lot of neat things. But because they do push the bounds, even if people are disappointed that it's not like a true exoskeleton, but why, if Tesla's gone through its best practices and its lessons learned, and they're going to gigacastings and they like the manufacturing enablers of it, right? And you can argue that, both ways on the cost spectrum, but it's, for all the ones that we've had, all of them, not all of them, but some of them have suffered from NVH issues, whether it's wind coming in from some part of the body, and we've heard from various customers that they have water ingress issues. And I see like Tesla, if you're sitting there and you're like, well, what's the problem? I'm like, well, we have 4 panels in the Model rear, coming together here in the Model 3, and the sealant is just not being applied correctly or whatever it is. And you're like, all right, well, that should be 1 panel, all right, cool. And you're like, you know what? Let's just stop doing this. And then everything becomes one piece. We focus on like a couple major critical joints to seal, and it's interesting. I'm not saying that's what happened in that conversation, but when I look at it from outside in of places that I have either direct or again, like secondhand knowledge of them having trouble, they've radically rectified something so they just don't have to deal with that trouble anymore. So that's interesting. So it makes sense to me when we saw like those leaked images without its panels that there was huge castings throughout it, and it may not be relying solely on the skin and like a subsurface structure like an airplane, right? So
it's interesting. I drive an R1T as my truck. So I'm interested. I love electric trucks. I'm obviously interested in the Cybertruck. I do have a couple questions, especially from somebody who's driven it. What are they doing with the rear visibility? Is when the tonneau's closed or open, there's no rear visibility at all? Is it done through the mirror?
Yeah, so when it's closed, you can't see out the back window, but they do have cameras. So they do have rear view mirrors that I believe are detachable. Ours, we had a pre-production one that we drove, so it didn't have a mirror, but it had the camera so you could see behind you.
I've owned 3 Teslas. I was an early adopter in the Model S, 2012. I drove a Model S, drove a Model X, drove a Model 3. So I've seen the evolution of Tesla vehicles, but I've long wondered why they're reticent to adopt a bird's eye view camera now that they have the bumper camera.
Right. I'm not sure. I mean, I really don't know, to be honest.
Yeah,
I do feel like
curious.
though with the Cybertruck, and you saw it on essentially like off-road oriented trucks with a forward-facing camera for low speed, which is kind of annoying. I wish you could use it all the time, but it's just that essentially that blind spot that you have there in the front is, significantly alleviated, with it. Even though the Cybertruck is, its frontal facing area is pretty low in comparison to a lot of other vehicles.
It's surprisingly low.
Yeah, I could not see the hood at all when I was driving that thing.
Yeah,
I was so afraid I was gonna hit something. But that turning radius, that is impressive.
Yeah,
I mean, the turning rear-wheel steering is incredible. What about the drive-by-wire? You think all the Tesla vehicles, the S and the X, will go steer-by-wire?
Yeah, I mean, why would you not? I think at this point, there's a host of reasons. I think once the Cybertruck validates it to the point where they're comfortable, and obviously they are, right? They're being sold.
Yeah.
And I know there's a lot of hesitancy with it, but there are, I don't know how much an F-22 costs, but F-16s, F-15s, pretty much every multi-million, maybe billion-dollar aircraft, the whole program has been fly-by-wire for years, right? And you're talking about, and I understand the concern, but you're talking about a system that if that fails, a lot of those airplanes are essentially aerodynamically unstable, not necessarily like a 747 or something like that, right? But in order to get the performance that they do as far as agility and handling and stuff like that, they're not necessarily aerodynamically stable. So even if they were manually tethered or you couldn't fly them, and if you lose that, they have a series of redundancies, but essentially that means instant, loss of that combat airframe and the pilot. And the airframes are expensive, but the loss of a pilot, especially from I think most Western militaries value trained, airmen, soldiers, and stuff like that pretty highly because it's very, very expensive to get them to a certain operational capacity. I don't think you'd invest that much into it if you felt the technology was not suitable for it, especially combat, right? Those planes, they're redundant, and this car will have redundancies as well. And you just have to think of where you're running the redundancies within the airframe or whatever it is to, mitigate failure modes along that. But I think so. I think there is, just off the top, right? When you look at how vehicles are assembled or decked, you have sub cradles kind of coming up, and that attachment point from steering column to steering rack, is this last bastion. There's other things too, like coolant lines typically between, your thermal system and the IP and stuff like that itself. But it's one of the last bastions of a human putting their hand inside between the body and chassis in these decking processes, So I think it's interesting, and that's a big enabler. Well, now it's a click somewhere else with its system and the harness. So, and then even from an impact perspective, with small overlap, rigid barrier sorb, it's a third-party test. But when you look at it, anything that is essentially isometric on any side of the vehicle is a variable, right, of a control that's different from one side. So you've eliminated that, right? Same thing like a 12-volt battery being on one side versus the other. So it's kind of interesting.
I'm going to be fascinated to see if this technology starts to permeate the automotive industry. And certainly you've seen, where Tesla leads everybody else follows. I think it is a paradigm shift. that we'll look back on in 10, 15 years when it starts to filter down to other automakers. It's like, this was a change. I think it was risky for Tesla, and Tesla's a company who's willing to take those risks. And I love seeing it. I love seeing what they're doing with steer by wire, and makes the yoke make a little more sense than some of their other cars.
Yeah, sure.
It will be interesting to see.
So you said you've driven numerous Teslas, right? And then
Yes.
you've gone to a Rivian.
And I had a Lucid in between there.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Can you give us like a brief summary? So you've had 3 Teslas, a Lucid,
Yeah.
and a Rivian. Like maybe high level, what you like, don't like.
Absolutely. So I was real early in Model S, and I knew what I was getting into. This was
Sure.
a Tesla, not where they are now, where I didn't know if the company was going to exist 6 months after delivery of my car. Real early. I remember waiting to get the car until they added parking sensors. Remember, the first Model S didn't ship with parking sensors, and it was added, I think 6 months after the initial release. That car was unlike anything else I'd ever driven, because it was unlike any other car that ever existed in the history of automobiles before it. The 17-inch touchscreen was incredible. A car that got software updates was, unbelievable. I never seen something like that before. I remember when I got the car, it didn't have creep, and then I got a software update that enabled creep. I just couldn't wrap my head around that my car got a new feature on Monday that it didn't have on Sunday. That was an absolutely unbelievable experience. I remember thinking that was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. Being able to pull up the reverse camera, no matter how fast I was driving, seems nuts too. This was pre-autopilot, didn't have anything yet in it, but I loved that car for the future represented. It was fast. That thing could beat anything. It was a P85 that I had. I loved every single thing about that car. When we got it, day after I took delivery, my wife and I had our first kid. By the time the car was due to go back, about 3.5 years later, we had 2 kids. So I migrated over to the Model X. Not as early with the X as I was on the S, but things like the Falcon doors at the time. It's still cool to see those things go up, even if they become so much more commonplace. Had a bunch of issues with mine, but it was just an incredible family car. And then I went to the Model 3. The Y wasn't available yet, so I wanted to try some of the things that the X didn't have. Actually, I should back up to the X was the first car that I bought and paid for the full self-driving package. I was like, oh, this is great. We're going to full self-driving at the end of the year. It's going to drive cross country. Elon said, I'm like, well, I should have it in my car. I'm going to have this car for, a 3-year lease. I'll definitely use the full self-driving. By the time that lease was up, the only feature that I ever got in that car, and it was 6 months before it was due to go back, was I got Smart Summon.
That's rough.
So that was cool. And then I got the Model 3, and I was like, I'm gonna do full self-driving again, because it's got to come this time. Like a dummy. I loved the Model 3. I used to use a phone as key. It was something I didn't have before with my other ones. The key card, the screen-oriented in the reverse way, and portrait. It was faster, more responsive. I had sort of the full autopilot features that had come since the Model X. And really, I love the cars not necessarily for a green factor, depending on who you ask. They're either green or less green, but I love them for just sheer performance factor.
Sure. Well, I think that's something they've... Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. No.
I think just the 0 to 60 time was... I still love that. I get the argument that EVs lack a soul. And I get that. I'm not... What's right for me is not always right for everybody else.
Sure.
But I've loved seeing Tesla be unafraid to take risks. And it harkens back to my initial thoughts about Elon was Tesla took risks because he took risks. And I respect what Tesla did especially in the early days, and then going through and reading Walter Isaacson's biography and having more context of what was going on at that time. Weeks away from going bankrupt, and they were pushing out these features. It was really awesome to see. And then my lease on the Model 3 was up, and I think I just wanted to try something different. The UI like essentially the same, relatively the same since I had my original Model S. I just wanted to look at something different. So I was like, I'm not shy to try a new car for a new company. I had an opportunity to get a Lucid Air, one of the Dream Editions. I mean, if I thought my Model S was fast, that thing was, I got the performance version of that. It was a 1,111 horsepower. It was unbelievable. It was the most fun I've ever had driving a car, ever. And it was the best driving EV I'd ever sat in. It was comfortable, ton of room in the back. Software was a garbled mess. The software was so, I mean, Lucy's not going to be talking about this, but I was one of the first to delivery. And I think when I met you guys too, I didn't even have my car. I had a loaner car from Lucid.
Right. Yep. Correct.
And that's because my car kept having issues. Cameras wouldn't turn on. Signals weren't working. Software was crashing. It was such a horrible experience. Actually, I wrote an email to Peter Rawlinson himself. I had met him at an event and he gave me his card. So I was like, screw it. I'm going to write him a letter. And I got a phone call from him directly, like 2 days later.
Yeah.
Apologizing, and they took my car up to the Bay Area, and they gave me a same car as a loaner to try to figure it out. I couldn't drive a car that I couldn't trust was going to work.
Sure.
And from what I understand, their version 2.0 fixed all of the issues.
Right.
And it seems like things have been markedly better. And I would probably buy another Lucid again. I think the Gravity looks awesome.
Yeah.
And then,
so how's your relationship with Lucid now?
Not so existent, I think is probably the best way to describe it. The Lucid, there weren't that many on the road, right? I paid for my car. I was a consumer that happens to be public facing. So I felt free to talk about everything. Lucid did not want me being so vocal, I think, especially about some of the issues I was having. I tried to be balanced with the positives as well. But it was my car. Like, what do you...
Sure.
It wasn't a press car.
Yeah, I'm only asking because Lucid, for whatever reason, doesn't want anything to do with us. We have requested press vehicles. We have requested interviews, and they just don't want to collab with us in any way.
Have you gotten a reason as to why?
No. Well, that's how you came along, because we tried to reach out to Lucid. And we're like, we're going to be in the LA area. We would love to check out one of the vehicles. And they flat out said no. So then I went on Twitter or X, and you were nice enough to let us check out yours. So much appreciated.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and it's, we've had a chance to look at both the battery and drive modules, especially the rear one. And it's very interesting. It's
their Wonderbox is incredible.
Yeah, it's I have a picture of Jordan like holding the differential like in his hand, like a little baby. It looks like a puppy. It's like wrapped up and stuff like that. But it's just interesting. There's a lot of times when people ask like if they want to like reduce costs in EVs, should they be building their own motors? And you're like, they're pretty efficient as is. And I'm not saying there's not more to be gained, from like a cost or a performance, perspective or even integration to the rest of the vehicle, most certainly. But it was just interesting to see, they took a different approach, to it from a packaging perspective, and it's incredibly small. You just think about the front and rear overhangs, the enabler. I mean, it's like this big. The inverter's bigger, but it's just it's very, very interesting. So, and I think that's cool too. It's cool to see them kind of develop a new take on it. And there's risk, just like with the Tesla. They're taking risk, and I've never driven one. I've seen them drive around. They're not like my type of vehicle per se, so I don't follow them like very closely. But it was very interesting to see them like those components up close in the car itself. So it's cool.
Their cars were so fun to drive, and I think when the software gets figured out, and again, like I understand it is, I do think they have a bright future, despite stock price and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
So it's going to be interesting to see what they do. I think their deal with, was it Aston Martin that they had with them?
I believe, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think they're going to provide some of those drive units. Is brilliant. It was a brilliant business move for them.
Yeah, because they really are very different.
Yeah,
and there's I think a lot of enablers, to them, because when you start getting into those hard packaging conflicts, right, where you're begging for millimeters, but now you've gotten 300 of them, back because of how small this drive module is. You're like, well, what do we do with this space? So, so while you're kind of talking, you've gone from Model 3 to Lucid. Before we kind of anything else Lucid, the Model 3 Highland, no stocks. They're not really here yet or anything like that.
Yeah.
But
my biggest issue with the no stock approach on the S and the X was the horn. And not really the stocks, but them changing what they changed was not having a physical horn that you can honk. Maybe it's an old school mentality, but having a button you have to look down to see seems horribly dangerous and innocent when you need to have a horn.
Sure.
And I know you can kind of put your hand over it and it honks a horn. That didn't always work in practice.
Sure.
I don't mind. I think that's a unique approach. They want to get rid of the stocks and it's on the wheel. I think that's fine. You can honk the horn like a normal car. From my standpoint, I have no issue with it. It's different. I think it's different for a lot of different sake. But Tesla's any input is error kind of approach, I guess, is sort of permeating that decision. I think you know what it is when you buy it, right? You're not going to have stocks, so you can't really complain about not having stocks.
Right. Yeah. It is interesting. But
yeah,
I would argue, like you're saying, it is what you're buying it. And if you don't like it, you can buy Mach-E, right?
Yeah.
It's a good EV and it's a very traditional vehicle. So if you like stocks, it's got them, it's even got a knob on the screen. So
I love what they did with Highland. I think bringing the Model 3 a bit more upscale too, the screen in the back, ventilated seats. I think the design, the tweaks to the front fascia look awesome. I can't wait for Highland to make its US debut. I'm assuming 24. Yeah.
We'll see. Full self-driving.
Yeah. I think they did an incredible job with it. And from what I understand too, fixed a lot of the build quality issues that had kind of been plaguing some of the Model 3. So that translates here to what they do in Fremont and Texas. They're going to continue to sell a ton of them.
Yeah. So the Rivian, right?
Yes.
You're driving that now. It's your current vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, what do you think about it? And maybe what do you think about like Rivian's approach to both like kind of this EV adventure truck and like the technology that's in it?
It looks nicer than a Cybertruck, in my opinion.
I should give the caveat here that I've never had a truck before. I'm not a traditional truck person. I'm not, I've gone off-roading a few times, but I'm not like off-roading. The only thing I haul is groceries from Costco. But I do have 3 kids and 3 active kids that are in and out of a lot of sports. And I looked at the R1T, the same approach I had with Tesla early and Lucid early was like, here's a new company. What they're doing is, I think, a very different approach to a truck. I'd love to give it a shot. I've had mine for about a year and a half. I have just shy of 30,000 miles on it. So I put a lot of miles on this thing. It has been essentially problem-free. I have the big dumb off-road wheels on it, still on its original tires that are still good. I haven't had camber issues that are causing tires to wear. The software, I think where Lucid made a mistake early on, they tried to put a bunch of stuff in software. I think early on Rivian put just a few things in there and they all worked well. And seeing the changes and seeing the software updates come, I have full faith in their software development and what they're doing and features getting added. It is the most practical family car I have ever had. I have my kids putting on baseball cleats on the gear tunnel. I got baseball bats in the gear tunnel. I have a bunch of groceries in the front trunk. We took my family of 5 to Yosemite a few months after I got it. And my daughter was little, so we took a full-size crib in the back. 5 people's luggage and food for weeks, all in one truck. I love it. What surprised me about it, my wife was driving a Honda Odyssey at the time, and she just drove the truck sometimes, because easier when she was out running errands. And she fell in love with it so much that she actually now drives an R1S.
It's very nice.
Yeah, we're a full Rivian family here. I think their approach, I think they were targeting the outdoorsy people, and I think it ends up being a lot of dads and moms that are buying these things.
Sure.
I think their cars are incredible, and nothing about driving either of these seems like first or second car from a new car maker.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I think they've done we've obviously torn one down. There's in some ways a lot of complexity.
I watched every single video, every second. I understood about 10% of what you guys said, but it was fascinating to watch, especially with the front crash protection stuff you guys are talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I was always excited for them. Like I thought it was just very interesting. Some elements they took. Some things I think I'd like to know the story. I try not to judge too harshly on anything because, frankly, you can explain. I don't want to say you can explain away anything, but timing, money, all that stuff matters. And all right, I get it. They're very interesting, and I really do hope they do well. I was interested because the one that we had before we tore it down. Actually, Eric and I were driving it very, very briefly before someone else took a look at it. There was car seats in the back, and I was like, man, just a little too small for me. I was interested though. Maybe when the kids are older and there's no car seats and they do like a decontented version,
it's perfect for car seats.
Yeah. So I guess maybe I need to get thinner ones. I don't know what the ones that we had in the back,
we had car seats. I have 2 boosters going in it now, and a car seat.
Gotcha. I'll have to give it a look because I do like it. I came from Rangers, when I was younger. Now I'm in the full size truck game, and they're nice. I don't know if I give up the space that they offer, but I've been tempted, with the medium mid-size truck game now and the Rivian for a while. I've just been paying a lot of attention to it. I think it's interesting.
I have a question for Jon. So you said Tesla, Lucid, Rivian. Have you tried any other EVs from any of the traditional OEMs?
I mean, not that I've owned myself. I had a chance to kind of drive through Michigan in the Lightning. Had a Mach-E for a little while just to test. Nothing that I've sort of owned myself. I would love to drive an iX and see if I could deal with the horrible looks for a great drive. Maybe some subjectively horrible looks, I should say, to the folks that own an iX.
Oh no, the iX is ugly.
I would love to talk to BMW's design team and be like, "What? The interior of these cars are stunning. Like, what are you thinking? Like, the car does not need to be all grill, and then to make it look like buck. Like, just explain it away." I would love to. I'm sure I'd get anything of like it's iconic and it's a kidney grill and it's all about a statement. I digress. But those are really the ones I've tried. I was going to get a EQS when they first came out instead of the Lucid, but then the local dealer here was marking it up by $50,000. And then I realized it looked like Kinetic, and that was probably a better choice. But those are my EV experiences.
Okay. So I have and you may not be able to answer this, but from like a tech perspective, right? It's something that just even here, we talk about it a lot, like life cycle engineering, things of that nature. And I used to give Jordan, like I still kind of do, a real hard time about his, the AirPods, like with the batteries. I was like, well, man, when they go bad, they go bad. And then, Apple responded, right? They had this program, they'll cut them open, they recycle the batteries. Because there's murmurs in the car industry, right? New Jersey's passed a law. Some, the other states are talking about advisory councils with respect to handling batteries, and vehicles specifically. They're, and it's essentially like, do you see this like on the tech side on how they might be dealing with essentially, I guess the fast progression, and how they may reclaim some aspects of the materials or battery material is used. And I just kind of, maybe your thoughts, if there's anything you've come across on the tech side and how the auto industry, specifically the domestic one, I think in Europe, it's very different with the life cycle perspective and carbon credits, but I'm just curious if you kind of come across that in your tech ventures.
So when it comes to phones, which is probably the biggest everybody, millions of phones in the world, or billions, if not more. But they all have a battery built in. But the life cycle of phone is not you or I go and buy a phone and then we sell it or turn it back into Apple or whoever we bought it from. That's not the life cycle of the phone. That phone has 2 or 3 lives after that. It goes to a secondary market, it goes to a developing country, 2 or 3 years after that phone came out. So the life cycle on those, it has more lives to live. But then again, people are driving a car longer than these phones are probably going to be in existence, right? So, Apple will proudly show you a video of their battery recycling robot that they like to sort of call out every few years on keynotes. But I really don't know what happens to all these batteries. It's environmental impact, what it costs to mine them, what it costs to recycle them, all those things. The greenhouse gas that gets emitted, I don't know the answer to those questions, and certainly are questions a lot of people are asking.
Okay. Yeah, I just was kind of curious. I just, we look at it, cost roll-ups, we have our cost per kilowatt hour, things of that nature. And just, it's a constant conversation. And then even for some of our more traditional customers, for more traditional materials like aluminum extrusions, trying to increase recycled amount, there's cost benefits there at times because of how constrained the aluminum industry is. And then on the backside, there might be some carbon credits. There's a lot of chatter here in the U.S. about that because some of this language is specifically targeting, EV car manufacturers. If you're building the battery, and it's now your responsibility to deal with that, right? And I think it's a little bit different. I would argue you made an interesting point about the phones. They're secondary and tertiary markets. I think trucks are the same way. So when people talk about these $100,000 EVs, I'm like, man, I've never seen a truck in a junkyard that hasn't had a tow hitch that's been abused and a bed that's barely together, right? Yeah, the first owner may not ever tow with it or anything like that, but then when someone buys it for like a lawn care business or something like that, I feel like trucks are either totaled out or they're just driven until the wheels fall off.
Yeah.
And from that perspective, either terrible for the environment or great, depending on how you're looking at that, they get a full life cycle for sure.
Yeah. I wonder if vehicle to grid technology is going to extend the life that people hold on to their EVs. People get whatever EV they get, assuming everyone has vehicle to grid technologies or vehicle to home stuff. Does it make sense to sell my EV when I already have it set up? It's a power wall, it's battery backup. Maybe giving these battery packs in cars secondary uses for the primary owner is kind of interesting use case for this.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation.
All right, we are approaching an hour. Before we get out of here, I just have to bring this up. You're a sports fan, obviously. I follow you on Twitter.
Thank you.
So us being in the Metro Detroit area and you getting Matt Stafford and then winning that Super Bowl, still really upsets me.
I mean, you guys are doing well though. I mean, you took Jared Goff. The Lions are back. It seems like one of those rare trades that everybody won.
Yeah, we are doing good now, but I'm happy for him, but I was so bad when he won.
I mean, he was the Detroit Rams.
I saw those shirts. I saw those shirts in Metro Detroit.
But I respect Lions organization. Just sports side real fast. I thought they did right by Stafford. I really do. I thought they did right by him. They treated him well. They respected the trade wish. It was kept in house. I thought they handled it very classy. I actually, because of all that, if I'm not cheering for the Rams, I'm a season ticket holder of the Rams. I'm cheering for the Lions. I love seeing those guys. I love seeing those guys do well. I love seeing Jared Goff thrive. And I don't think if that trade hadn't happened, that the Lions would be even close to contention that they're in right now. They're looking at a 2 seed in the NFC. They wouldn't be a 2 seed if that trade hadn't happened.
Probably not.
So I got love. I got love for the Detroit Lions.
There you go.
I want to respect your time here because we're kind of coming close to it. But I just want to say, thank you very much. It was nice to talk to you. You kind of have a very interesting story, just from the foundations of YouTube, kind of how things have changed the tech industry, and now kind of being a dedicated thing. It's very interesting to see, and I wish you continued success. So
thank you for having me on. Sorry, I zigged and zagged all over.
No, it's fine.
Your agenda here.
No, ultimately we just wanted to talk to you. So it's great. Thanks again, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me back. For having me on.
Yeah.